The House Judiciary Committee chamber fell into shocked silence as Chairman Jim Jordan stared across the witness table at the woman who had just delivered the most devastating critique of big tech monopolies that Congress had heard in decades. Riley Reid, sitting perfectly composed in a sharp navy blazer, her blonde hair pulled back in a professional bun, had just finished presenting damning evidence about social media manipulation that would reshape the entire technology regulation debate. "Ms. Reid," Chairman Jordan began, his voice tight with barely controlled skepticism, "I have to say, when we received your request to testify before this committee, many of us questioned whether someone with your background could possibly have anything meaningful to contribute to serious policy discussions about technology regulation." The statement sent shockwaves through the packed hearing room. Congressional reporters exchanged stunned glances, committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and the gallery buzzed with barely contained whispers. Never before had a committee chairman so directly questioned a witness's qualifications based on their past career, especially not someone who had just presented groundbreaking research on social media algorithms and corporate manipulation. But Riley Reid didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly opened a thick leather portfolio filled with years of meticulous research, her movements deliberate and confident. What happened next would transform this congressional hearing into one of the most memorable technology policy sessions in modern political history, proving that the most powerful voices for digital reform can emerge from the most unexpected places. Before we dive into this extraordinary confrontation, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of transformation, expertise, and the triumph of truth over prejudice. The tension surrounding this congressional hearing had been building for months, ever since the controversial revelations about social media platforms manipulating user behavior through algorithmic design. The hearing was titled Big Tech Accountability: Protecting Users from Corporate Manipulation, and it was supposed to feature testimony from industry executives, academic researchers, and policy experts about the need for stronger technology regulation. What most observers didn't know was that Riley Reid had been quietly building one of the most comprehensive digital rights advocacy organizations in the country. After leaving the adult entertainment industry in 2019, she had enrolled in Stanford University's computer science program, completing her degree with highest honors while simultaneously earning an MBA from the business school. Her thesis on algorithmic manipulation and user exploitation in social media platforms had won the university's most prestigious award for technology policy research. Following graduation, Riley had founded the Digital User Protection Initiative, a nonprofit organization that investigated social media algorithms, documented corporate manipulation tactics, and advocated for stronger user protection laws. Over the past 3 years, her organization had published groundbreaking research exposing how major tech companies deliberately designed their platforms to be addictive, how they manipulated user emotions for profit, and how they harvested personal data without meaningful consent. The congressional testimony was the culmination of her advocacy strategy. Her organization had spent 2 years documenting specific examples of how Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and other platforms used psychological manipulation techniques to maximize user engagement and advertising revenue, often at the expense of user mental health and democratic discourse. Her 40-page written testimony had stunned policy experts with its technical sophistication and devastating evidence of corporate misconduct. Drawing on computer science, behavioral psychology, economics, and legal analysis, Riley had crafted arguments that offered new frameworks for understanding how technology companies operated and why existing regulations were completely inadequate. Chairman Jim Jordan, a 59-year-old conservative Republican from Ohio, had spent his political career championing free market principles and opposing government regulation of business. Known for his aggressive questioning style and skepticism toward witnesses he deemed unqualified, Jordan had developed a reputation for using congressional hearings to score political points rather than gather information. When Riley had been granted 20 minutes to present her testimony, an unusual opportunity for someone representing a relatively unknown nonprofit organization, most observers assumed it was Congress's attempt to hear from real users rather than academic experts. Few had bothered to research Riley's extensive technical credentials or the groundbreaking research her organization had conducted. "This isn't a social media influencer conference," whispered a veteran congressional staffer to his colleague. "Technology policy requires serious expertise. She's going to be completely out of her depth against these committee members." The stakes were enormous. The hearing involved fundamental questions about corporate power, user protection, and the government's role in regulating technology companies. If Riley's arguments proved persuasive, it could lead to the most significant technology regulation in decades. If she failed, not only would corporate manipulation continue unchecked, but her innovative research would be dismissed as the amateur activism of someone seeking attention rather than policy reform. As Riley approached the witness microphone, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Unlike many first-time congressional witnesses who appeared nervous before the committee, she carried herself with the poise of someone who understood both the technology and the political stakes. Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of the committee, Riley began, her voice clear and authoritative. "Thank you for the opportunity to present evidence about how major technology companies deliberately manipulate users through sophisticated psychological techniques that maximize corporate profits while causing documented harm to mental health, democratic discourse, and user autonomy." Her opening was direct and substantive, but Chairman Jordan, who had been reviewing Riley's background with obvious skepticism, saw an opportunity to discredit her testimony before she could present her evidence. While congressional hearings typically allowed witnesses to deliver their prepared statements before questioning, Jordan interrupted to challenge Riley's credibility immediately. "Ms. Reid," Jordan interrupted sharply, "I have to stop you right there. Before we waste the committee's time listening to speculation about technology policy, I think the American people deserve to know what qualifies someone with your background to testify before Congress about complex regulatory issues that could affect the entire technology sector." A murmur ran through the hearing room at the unusually personal and aggressive nature of the attack. Ranking Member Jerry Nadler leaned toward his microphone with obvious disapproval, while Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez frowned at the inappropriate focus on Riley's personal history rather than her policy expertise. The packed gallery watched intently as Riley paused, meeting Jordan's hostile gaze directly. Those familiar with Riley's recent media appearances and written work recognized the composed determination that always preceded her most powerful advocacy. "Chairman Jordan," she replied with unwavering confidence, "I appreciate your question about qualifications. I have a computer science degree from Stanford University, an MBA from Stanford Business School, and I've spent the past 3 years conducting empirical research on social media algorithms and user manipulation tactics. But more importantly, I've brought evidence that I believe will speak for itself." She opened her portfolio and retrieved a tablet containing detailed technical analyses, statistical research, and documented examples of corporate manipulation that she had clearly prepared extensively. This wasn't the influencer testimony Jordan had anticipated. This was serious technical analysis backed by rigorous academic research. What followed was the opening move in a political confrontation that would leave Congress, the technology industry, and digital rights advocates stunned by its power and precision. Chairman Jordan, realizing his initial attack hadn't rattled Riley, leaned forward with increased aggression. "Ms. Reid, even accepting your acclaimed academic credentials, how can this committee take seriously testimony from someone whose previous career involved explicit content creation? How do we know this isn't just an attempt to gain publicity for your current business ventures?" The question was designed to be devastating, a personal attack that would force Riley to defend her past rather than present her research. Jordan assumed that focusing on her adult film background would discredit her testimony regardless of its content. Riley's response was immediate and devastating. "Chairman Jordan, I find it interesting that you're more concerned about my past career choices than about the evidence I've brought regarding corporate manipulation of American families. But since you've raised the question of credibility, let me address it directly." She turned to her tablet with practiced confidence. "My previous work in adult entertainment gave me first-hand experience with how digital platforms exploit creators and manipulate user behavior. I learned how these companies promise creators control and financial independence while using algorithms designed to extract maximum value from both creators and consumers. Her voice gained strength as she continued. That experience motivated me to understand the technical mechanisms behind digital manipulation, which is why I pursued formal education in computer science and business. The combination of lived experience and technical training allowed me to identify patterns of corporate misconduct that purely academic researchers have missed. The hearing room fell silent as Riley demonstrated that Jordan's attack had actually strengthened her position. She had transformed his attempt to discredit her into evidence of her unique qualifications to analyze digital exploitation. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, recognizing the shift in momentum, jumped in with the substantive question. Ms. Reid, can you explain to the committee what specific manipulation techniques you've documented in your research? Thank you, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Riley replied, clearly relieved to discuss her actual findings. My organization has identified 12 distinct algorithmic manipulation techniques used by major social media platforms. Let me walk you through the 3 most damaging. She turned to detailed slides that appeared on the hearing room screens. First, variable ratio reinforcement schedules. These platforms deliberately make their notification and content delivery unpredictable to trigger the same psychological responses as gambling addiction. Users never know when they'll receive validation through likes, comments, or messages, which creates compulsive checking behavior. Riley continued with remarkable technical precision. Second, emotional manipulation algorithms. These platforms track user emotional responses to different types of content and deliberately prioritize content that generates strong negative emotions, anger, fear, outrage, because such content drives higher engagement rates and more advertising revenue. The committee members were now listening with obvious attention as Riley outlined sophisticated corporate manipulation tactics that few of them had understood before. Third, and most concerning, these platforms use what we call vulnerability targeting. Their algorithms identify users experiencing depression, anxiety, relationship problems, or financial stress, and then deliver content specifically designed to exploit those vulnerabilities for commercial purposes. Representative Jerry Nadler, the ranking Democrat, leaned forward with visible concern. Ms. Reid, you're alleging that these companies deliberately target vulnerable users? Do you have specific evidence of this practice? Congressman Nadler, I have extensive documentation, Riley replied, producing a thick binder of evidence. My organization obtained internal company documents through Freedom of Information Act requests, whistleblower reports, and data analysis that proves these practices are deliberate corporate policy, not accidental side effects. She opened to specific pages, without hesitation. For example, Facebook's internal research, which they tried to keep secret, shows that their algorithms deliberately amplify content that makes users feel bad about themselves because such content drives more engagement. Instagram's internal studies prove that their platform causes depression and anxiety in teenage girls, but they've continued optimizing their algorithms to maximize these harmful effects. The hearing room buzzed with shocked whispers as Riley presented evidence that most committee members had never seen before. Chairman Jordan, recognizing that his strategy had backfired and that Riley was gaining credibility with each answer, attempted to redirect the discussion. Ms. Reid, even if we accept your allegations, what specific regulatory solutions are you proposing? And how do we balance user protection with free market principles and innovation? It was exactly the question Riley had spent months preparing to answer. Chairman Jordan, I'm not proposing government control of content or algorithms. Instead, I'm recommending transparency requirements, user control mechanisms, and accountability measures that preserve innovation while protecting users from exploitation. She outlined her comprehensive regulatory framework. First, algorithmic transparency requirements. Social media companies should be required to disclose how their algorithms work, what data they collect, and how they use that data to influence user behavior. Users have a right to understand how they're being manipulated. Riley continued with growing authority. Second, user control mandates. Platforms should be required to provide users with meaningful control over their algorithmic experience. Users should be able to opt out of manipulation techniques, choose their own content priorities, and access their platforms without being subjected to deliberate psychological exploitation. Representative Ted Lieu, a Democrat from California with a computer science background, spoke up with obvious interest. Ms. Reid, your technical analysis is impressive. How would these regulations be enforced without stifling technological innovation? Thank you, Representative Lieu. Riley responded. The key is focusing on disclosure and user choice, rather than dictating specific technical solutions. Companies would remain free to innovate, but they'd be required to be honest about what they're doing and give users real alternatives to exploitative algorithms. She referenced specific sections of her written testimony. My proposal includes safe harbor provisions for companies that implement user-protective algorithms, financial incentives for platforms that prioritize user well-being over engagement metrics, and enforcement mechanisms through both FTC oversight and private rights of action for users who've been harmed by deliberate manipulation. The dynamic in the hearing room had transformed completely. What began as an attempt to dismiss Riley based on her background had become serious examination of corporate power and user protection. Committee members from both parties were asking substantive questions about her regulatory proposals and technical findings. Representative Jim McGovern, a Democrat from Massachusetts, posed a question that would become central to subsequent technology policy debates. Ms. Reid, how do we ensure that platforms designed for communication and information sharing don't become tools for corporate manipulation and social division? Riley's response was both technically sophisticated and politically astute. Representative McGovern, the fundamental issue is that current business models reward platforms for capturing and maintaining user attention through any means necessary, regardless of social consequences. We need to change those incentives. She outlined her comprehensive analysis. Platforms should be evaluated based on user satisfaction and well-being metrics, not just engagement and advertising revenue. We should require companies to publish user satisfaction data, mental health impact studies, and democratic discourse quality measurements. Market forces will drive innovation toward user-beneficial algorithms once we make corporate manipulation visible and accountable. As Riley's testimony time began to expire, Chairman Jordan made one final attempt to undermine her credibility. Ms. Reid, you've presented interesting theories, but how do we know this isn't just anti-business activism disguised as research? What's your real agenda here? Riley's response would become one of the most quoted statements in technology policy discussions. Chairman Jordan, my agenda is protecting American families from corporate manipulation that harms children, undermines democratic discourse, and exploits user vulnerabilities for profit. If that's anti-business, then we need to redefine what business should be in a democratic society. She concluded with quiet power. These technology companies provide valuable services, but they shouldn't be allowed to deliberately harm users in pursuit of profits. Regulation that promotes transparency, user control, and corporate accountability will make these platforms better for everyone: users, businesses, and society. The hearing concluded with unprecedented bipartisan interest in Riley's regulatory proposals. What had begun as an attempt to discredit her testimony had instead established her as one of the most credible voices in technology policy reform. The aftermath of what media outlets quickly dubbed the Reid hearing spread through political and technology circles with remarkable speed. Within hours, Riley's written testimony was being circulated among congressional staff, policy researchers, and technology journalists. Legal experts praised her regulatory framework as both technically sophisticated and politically viable. CNN technology correspondent Brian Fung summarized the day's events. I've covered technology policy hearings for over a decade, and I've never seen a witness present such compelling evidence of corporate manipulation or such practical regulatory solutions. Riley Reid didn't just critique big tech. She provided a roadmap for fixing it. Social media exploded with clips from the hearing, particularly Riley's responses to Chairman Jordan's attempts to discredit her testimony. The hashtag regulate algorithms trended nationally as users shared their own experiences with social media manipulation and called for the regulatory reforms Riley had proposed. Technology industry publications published immediate analyses of Riley's regulatory framework. TechCrunch called it the most comprehensive and technically sound approach to social media regulation yet proposed in Congress. Wired described her testimony as a masterclass in how lived experience can enhance rather than compromise rigorous policy analysis. 3 days after the hearing, the Washington Post published a detailed profile revealing the extent of Riley's technical education and policy research that had remained largely unknown. The article described her transformation from adult entertainment to technology advocacy as one of the most remarkable examples of personal reinvention and expertise development in modern American politics. Within a week, Riley's Digital User Protection Initiative received over $2 million in donations from individuals inspired by her congressional testimony. Major foundations announced grants to support her organization's research on algorithmic manipulation and user protection advocacy. More significantly, bipartisan groups of congressional representatives began drafting legislation based on Riley's regulatory proposals. The Algorithm Transparency and User Protection Act incorporated many of her recommendations for mandatory disclosure requirements, user control mechanisms, and enforcement procedures. Riley maintained her focus on policy substance rather than personal publicity. In a brief statement following the hearing, she said, "Technology regulation should be based on evidence, not politics or personal prejudices. I'm grateful that Congress engaged seriously with research about corporate manipulation, and I hope our legislative proposals can protect users while preserving innovation." 6 months after her congressional testimony, Riley published Digital Manipulation: How Social Media Companies Exploit Users and What We Can Do About It, a comprehensive analysis that became required reading in technology policy courses nationwide. The book combined technical analysis, policy recommendations, and personal insights in ways that both experts and general readers found compelling and actionable. Her transformation from adult entertainment to technology policy leadership became a powerful symbol of how expertise could develop through diverse experiences and how the most effective advocates often came from unexpected backgrounds. The congressional hearing had proven that technical knowledge, combined with lived experience of digital exploitation, could provide insights that traditional policy experts had missed. Most importantly, Riley had demonstrated that in American democracy, the power of evidence and well-researched policy proposals could overcome social prejudices about who deserved to be heard in serious political discussions. Her journey became an inspiration for anyone who had been told their background disqualified them from contributing to important policy debates. The regulatory framework she developed during her congressional testimony became the foundation for the most significant technology policy reforms in decades, protecting millions of users from corporate manipulation while preserving the innovation and connectivity that made social media valuable for democratic discourse and human connection. Thank you for watching this remarkable story of policy expertise and political courage. If you found this account of transformation and the power of evidence-based advocacy inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of unexpected expertise, democratic participation, and the ongoing fight to ensure that technology serves people rather than exploiting them.